I'm going to be very pleased to be your moderator for this session, and it's all about sustainability. So we're going to be talking about why sustainability is so important and what you can do about that. We're hopefully going to make it quite a lively conversation, so I'm joined by some esteemed industry colleagues to do so, and you'll have the opportunities to ask us questions live through the event, and we'll do our utmost to answer them. So firstly, a little bit of background. So you may or may not be familiar with the Global Business Travel Association, the GBTA. GBTA is the only real global industry body now for travel professionals post-pandemic. And myself and some colleagues have joined with GBTA to set up a working committee here in Asia Pacific, looking at how we can further advance the cause of sustainability for the Asia market. So we work very closely with some other committees in North America and in Europe to make sure that we align with what global best practice may be that through legislation or organizations stepping up, as well as making sure that we do our best to tailor that to the Asia Pacific needs. And I think all of us based in Asia know that we are unique and there are unique challenges and opportunities that present itself in each market. So over the course of the next hour, we will do our utmost to address some of those. This is part of a series of webinars that we will do, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in terms of what the future holds. And today we'll be very much talking about why it's so important and what you can do about that from a baby step point of view. Sometimes it can be quite daunting to think about addressing sustainability in a corporate travel program, and we're here to try and help you break that down into some easy next steps. First of all, though, I've got a short video, which is a video from the Global Head of Sustainability for GBTA. It's a lady called Delphine Millot. Delphine is the SVP for sustainability, and she's recorded a few words. She's based in the US, so she didn't really want to join us at 2 a.m, but she's recorded a few words, a few minutes to talk through sustainability at a global level. So please allow me just to share the video with you now, and then we'll come back to myself.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and I am pleased to share this update with you on our sustainability journey at GBTA. Climate change and reducing our emissions is such a huge challenge for the travel industry. GBTA had to step in and provide guidance to our members. We started this journey in November of last year and accomplished so much in less than a year across our 3 key value pillars at GBTA, which are community, learning, and advocacy. There is a real need and appetite across the full business travel industry, both buyers and suppliers, to better understand what sustainable travel means and concrete actions we can take to reduce our climate impacts. There is also a lot of confusion, fragmentation, and no real standards for what green travel is. And there are also regional and cultural differences in the approach to be taken. This is why it was so important for GBTA to have an Asia-Pacific task force for our Global Sustainability Committee, comprised of both buyers and suppliers, to advance sustainable business travel in the region. GBTA has made a commitment to better guide our members in their practices and their decisions in sustainability. That's our learning pillar, and GBTA released 2 very important initiatives this year. The first one is a study on the state of sustainability in business travel, which identified the key barriers and also the opportunities for our sector to green up its acts. The study also showed that change is underway. 3/4 of travel managers have incorporated or are planning to incorporate sustainability objectives in their travel policy, and a telling 90% of respondents also said that GBTA has a role to play to guide our members and be the driving force for industry collaboration. Which brings me to our second initiative, which is the release of our sustainability toolkit. This is really the brainchild of our sustainability committee with input from our APAC task force, and the result is quite remarkable. We now have 12 models that cover critical topics such as key concepts and definitions around sustainable travel, tracking, reporting, and offsetting of emissions, how to recognize and assess sustainable suppliers, and also how to encourage employees to travel better. We've just released the toolkit last week and encourage you to go through and share your feedback. This is very much a living tool, and we will keep it up to date based on your comments and feedback. I also mentioned advocacy and community as key work streams for GBTA. On the advocacy front, what we are doing is really talking to governments because we need their support to make progress at the speed and scale needed. This includes making sure that there's support for green technologies like sustainable aviation fuel, to make it more affordable and available, but also boosting air-to-rail connections and harmonizing the way emissions are being calculated and reported. On the community front, which is a very important pillar for GBTA, we want to make sure that we become a platform for debate and engagement across the full business travel ecosystem. We are bringing sustainability as a topic across all of our events across the globe to share best practices and learn from each other's. Because when it comes to sustainability, right now we do have more questions than answers, and it's very important to have this dialogue and exchange of best practices. This is a key driver for the event we're going to organize together with PATA in Bangkok on the 8th and 9th of December. It will all be about defining a responsible and sustainable future for travel. And our sustainability committee will have an education session with concrete steps on how to green your business travel program. I will now leave you to your speakers for today's webinar and wish you a very productive event and discussion. And I also hope to see you soon in the flesh at future GBTA events. Thank you.
So there we go. So a few things just to recap on what Delphine has said. So number one, GBTA is really committed towards sustainability, invest in both resources, people, and so forth with regards to advancing the topic. And it is quite complex. So we are trying to take the modulars, educational pieces that have been built, as Delphine has mentioned, but translate them a little bit more into practical measures here in Asia Pacific, but use those as a foundation. They're incredibly detailed modules which are available to all GBTA members across the world. Now, moving forward into what we're going to do today. So I'm very pleased, firstly, to introduce an industry colleague of mine. She's going to spend the next 10 minutes or so just talking through some of the principles of sustainability, both with regards to why it's so important and then how you can address it. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Michelle Degenhardt. Michelle is the Global Sustainability Officer for Flight Centre Travel Group. So over to you, Michelle. Best of luck.
Thank you so much, Carl, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for taking part in the webinar series today. My goal today, as Carl said, is to give you a quick overview of what we mean by sustainability and bring you up to speed on some of the different terms and acronyms and talk you through why sustainability is such an important topic at the moment. Jolie, did you want to bring the slideshow up? We'll then look at the best practice to start when bringing sustainability into your travel program, which will lead into some interesting discussion from our panel. The GBTA Sustainability Committee Asia Pacific is really here to use our experience to provide leadership and resources to help you balance the social, economic and environmental impact of your business travel program. And our goals are really to provide education and help you integrate sustainability into your travel program and provide specific travel advice for the Asia Pacific region. But our overarching goal is to remove, as Carl said, is to remove some of the complexity from sustainability in travel and encourage more businesses to start bringing sustainability into their travel program. So I might move to the next slide. So what do we mean by sustainability. So really the technical term is meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And to simplify that, it's really about doing good business without negatively impacting the environment, the community, or society as a whole. So the next slide, Jolie. So when you start to delve into the world of sustainability, you'll come across many acronyms, frameworks, terms. There's a lot within the world of sustainability. So I'm just going to touch on two of those today that you will come across when you are looking at your sustainability program, ESG and Sdg. So ESG refers to environment, social and governance, and it's often referred to when speaking about your sustainability program. Sustainability can mean different things to different entities, and sustainability is implied as an umbrella term of doing good. And ESG provides a framework for reporting on the good that you are doing. Often ESG reporting is for larger companies, and it's often used by investors to really rate and rank different organisations in what they're giving back to their communities. However, it can also provide a simple framework to help categorise the work that you are doing it, putting it into buckets as such. So what is your organisation doing for the environment? What are you doing for people, either people within your organisation or people in the community? And then what is your principles, or what are the structure that you have in place to enable this work to happen? So it is, although it is used for larger organisations and by investors, it's still a good framework to use when looking at your sustainability program. So the next slide, please. So the other acronym I want to touch on briefly today is the SDGs, and you will see this as well when you are looking at sustainability programs. So the Sustainable Development Goals, or Global Goals, were created back in 2015 when world leaders got together to define how to tackle the global problems, which they are really quite overwhelming, some of these problems that we are trying to tackle. And there's 17 global goals, and there's upwards of 40% of organisations that have attached metrics to the 17 goals to tell the story of the good that they're doing within their organisations. So SDGs are another framework used to simplify what is a very complex topic. So the next slide, thank you, Jolie. So we've got an idea of what sustainability is. But how does it apply to your travel program? So what is sustainability in business travel? So it's really managing the environmental and social impacts generated by your travel program. So it's all about managing the impact that your travel program has on the world. So a number of organisations, both large and small, are going through the process of understanding and setting goals to reduce the impact of their business travel. And there are a few considerations to make when you are looking at your business travel through the lens of sustainability. And the first one really to take into account is traveller health and wellness. Often people go immediately to emissions calculation, but it's really important when reviewing your business travel policy that you don't go straight to the emissions without considering the traveller and ensuring that you're always prioritising their health and wellness. Because what may work well for the environment may not support your traveller. The next one is emissions calculation. So before you can set emissions reduction targets, you really need to understand your baseline, and you'll require some sort of calculation of previous emissions, and these calculations can usually be provided by your travel management company. So really, before you can start reducing, you really need to start measuring. So that's the emissions calculation piece. And then thirdly, the travel policy. Once you know the changes that you want to make to reduce the impact of your travel program, it's about incorporating these changes into your policy and educating your travellers as to why these changes are required. But this is where I want to assure you that there is a full spectrum of where people are at on this journey. I was at a small conference this morning, and there was a good analogy used talking about there are some businesses that are crawling, some are walking, and some are running. And you really got to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run. So you can start small and then work your way up from there. So some companies haven't even started, and some are well into their business travel policy and making their program sustainable. So we've touched on what we mean by sustainability and given you some of the very basic terms that you may come across when you start to delve into the world of sustainability. Now I just want to touch on why it's so important. So really looking at the why and why it's such an urgent issue with some of the statistics I'm going to run through with you right now, you will be familiar with, but it does highlight the importance of really starting the process. So if we go to the next slide, so we are in a global climate crisis. So there are 2,089 jurisdictions, 38 countries, covering more than 1 billion citizens that have declared a climate emergency. Climate change does impact more than just the climate. So there's twice as many people that are displaced from climate events than violence and conflict. That's more than 21.5 million people each year that are displaced. And plastic. So nearly every piece of plastic you've ever used still exists and will continue to exist for the next 500 years. I could go on with hundreds of different statistics, but that just highlights a few of the reasons why it really is an urgent issue for us. But even if we were to put aside the moral issues that I've just touched on there, it also makes really good business sense to focus on sustainability. So we'll go to the next slide. So 75%, so millennials will make up 75% of the workforce in 2025, and they are looking for environmentally and socially responsible employers. 28% of consumers make decisions based on how their businesses treat their people. 20% of consumers make decisions based on how businesses treat the environment, and 53% of travel decision makers rated improving visibility to make more sustainable choices as one of the critical factors. 58% of executive stakeholders consider reports on sustainable and carbon emissions extremely important, and 80% of business travellers would be more inclined to work for a company that builds sustainability into their corporate policy. So to summarise all of those statistics there, if you want to attract and retain the best talent, you have to have a sustainability program in place. And if you want to attract and retain customers, you also have to have a sustainability program in place. So that's why, putting the moral issues aside, it does make good business sense to jump on board with the sustainability processes now. We'll jump to the next slide. So sustainability, as we mentioned, it is complex. And some of the slides I've touched on today are really highlighting as a way of trying to take some of that complexity away, because it is a crucial topic. And regardless of where you are at on your journey, whether you're crawling or you're running, we're hoping our webinar series will help you navigate these topics. Some of the topics we will be covering over the course of this series is where to start introducing sustainability into your travel program, introducing sustainability into your supplier sourcing exercises, decarbonisation and offsetting, organising sustainability meetings and events, engaging employees to travel more sustainably, and carbon emissions and reporting. So what is best practice? We'll jump to the next slide. So when you registered to attend this webinar, each participant was asked to complete a short survey, and we thought it might be good to share some of these results that we received. So of the survey results we received, 83% of respondents said that their company has set sustainable targets that are applicable to business travel and meeting programs. 67% are responsible for the implementation of sustainability and carbon reduction strategies into their travel and meeting program, and 75% of respondents don't feel they have enough knowledge to drive sustainability strategies, which hopefully we'll be able to help you with. And this was the order of the greatest interest of topics for the future webinar. So carbon emissions and reporting, place number 1, and then the traveller wellbeing, number 2, sustainable meetings and events, decarbonisation and offsetting, sustainable travel policies, and then finally engaging employees to travel more sustainably. So moving on to the next slide. So where to start? And I've just got 5 tips here, but that's going to lead into the discussion that we will move into now, and we will have time for questions and answers as well. So really to start, if you haven't started, so really understanding your starting point. Is there already a sustainability strategy in place for your organisation, and what are the goals? Define what sustainable travel means to your organisation. What is the level of ambition and appetite for change? Once you've answered those 2, prioritise your initiatives, set your goals and targets, and then track, measure, report, and then continue refining your goals. So I'm now going to hand back over to Carl, who will be facilitating further discussion about bringing sustainability into your travel program, and we'll open it up for Q&A. So over to you, Carl.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Well done. Great presentation there. Now, I mentioned at the start that we would be taking questions live on the Q&A. A big call out to Gaurav Sundaram, who has definitely worked out where his keyboard is and has been flying out of the traps with questions. So Gaurav, thank you very much for that. We'll start to address some of those questions as we move forward in this. And a call out to anybody else listening, if you do have questions, please ask them in the Q&A, or they're starting to come in now, and we will try and address them as we have our discussion today. Just one of the questions, Gaurav, that you asked was how many in that survey that Michelle just mentioned, and was it a market across APAC? It was everybody who'd registered. So it was open to, I think we had just over 300 registrants on that across Asia Pacific. Look, it's not a hard and fast survey. It was just a bit of a litmus test of what you guys thought would be interesting. Your first question as well was around carbon emissions. Actually, we'll touch on that a little bit later in the discussion, but there is going to be a webinar on that, as Michelle mentioned, probably our top topic on carbon emission reporting and what's best practice, which we intend to try and do in the new year, if not before. So you're definitely on track with where we hope to take you as well. So thank you for that. So firstly, allow me to introduce the other panelists. So you've heard from Michelle. But I'm also pleased to introduce two other panelists who will be joining us. The first is Rachel Tracy. Rachel is a strategic sourcing manager for Brookfield Asset Management, based out in Australia. And Nicola Winchester. Nick is the Asia Pacific Travel and Meetings Head for Ernst & Young, based in Hong Kong. And then there'll be myself and Michelle, myself in Singapore, and Michelle in Australia as well. Okay, so first question. As you haven't actually had to speak yet, Nick and Rachel, I'm going to put the first question to you two, and also as buyers. How do you feel companies generally see the need to address sustainability, and how are you seeing your organisations and other organisations approach it from a buyer perspective?
I'll take that one first, Carl, actually. I think from our organisation perspective in EY, I think actually Michelle summed it up really well in the slides that she shared and what she talked about in terms of, first, the moral issue. You know, I think as a global organisation that EY is, there is a moral issue that, you know, we could not stand back from and just ignore. The other aspect, I guess, is around the employee retention element. You know, for us actually, and again in the statistics that Michelle shared, she shared that, you know, 75% of millennials want to work in an organisation that have a really important aspect based on sustainability. For us, we're an organisation where I think it's at least 80% of our workforce are made up of people under the age of 27. And so, you know, for us, we've surveyed it and polled it within our organisation, and we know that people want to be involved and want to be in an organisation that's taken it really seriously. And so the talent retention aspect is definitely something that can't be overlooked. And so, you know, we see it from where we sit. We've taken a very serious approach to it. We started our journey really seriously with it and in earnest back in 2020, where our, you know, chairman and CEO outlined that we were going to be carbon negative in 2021, and we were. But then we actually, you know, boldly stated that we would be net zero by 2025. And for us, there isn't an option to fail in that, because actually we're client serving. We're actually advising many organisations on this in their own organisations. And so, you know, we're really seeing the conversations ramp up pace significantly. And the thing that I think is really exciting about it is that from those of us that are involved in travel, we're right at the heart of that. Because in our organisation, being that we're client serving, you know, we've got a big footprint in air travel and, you know, in business travel as a whole. And so therefore, you know, we're under the spotlight of that. And so we're not shying away from that. We're actually embracing it. And as I talk to, colleagues in the industry and peers, I think everyone is at a different pace. And that doesn't matter, actually. I think it's okay. People have set their goals out differently. Some organisations haven't set goals yet. So we're definitely seeing, a real spectrum of what's happening. But for us, yeah, it's definitely something that is pivotal in what we're doing.
Rachel, anything to add to that?
Yeah, to add to that, look, I think most corporates and travel suppliers, it is certainly a key focus. For Brookfield, we find it really important that we are partnering with travel suppliers who are also prioritising sustainability. A recent example of that would be the hotel RFP that was conducted a couple of months ago, where in previous years we may have asked the one question, does a hotel have a sustainability program? And it was almost like a tick and flick, yes you do, okay. Now for the most recent one, we took a deeper dive, asking multiple questions about the program around global certification, third-party audits, how and when is carbon measured, and how water consumption is measured. So certainly a lot different from previous years, and it was taken into the evaluation process.
Fantastic. I'm just looking at the Q&A, and there's been some really good questions come in, generally around very similar topics, generally around how to balance cost off. So I think some people are saying, yes, we see the need. How do we balance the cost? So Julie Murphy, I think there's only one based in Hong Kong, talks about, how do you balance off the cost over carbon if it is a primary focus. Somebody anonymously said there's a general perception that sustainable concepts are considered expensive or pricey. How do we change that? Joanna Patterson also talking about the cost elements and how do companies pay for that. I'm curious to get your views, Nicola, Rachel, around, from a buyer perspective first, how you guys are seeing your organisations and other organisations balancing off this cost element of sustainability.
I think it's a brilliant question, and it's a question that in truth we are asking of our internal stakeholders and decision makers as well, because in Asia Pacific particularly, I think it's true to say that all organisations are very cost sensitive. Certainly we're no different in that our policies here tend to be more stringent. But equally, I think it's part of an education as well. And it's on us as those that are the custodians of travel programs really to educate our internal stakeholders as to how to balance that. And so, to give you an example, we've tried to put policies in place that really help to drive down the sustainability and achieve sustainability goals by driving down the emissions, but being focused on employee well-being and retention. But equally, that actually then can support costs. A good example is that coming through the pandemic, we realised that, we weren't travelling. Like most organisations, there was very limited travel. Coming out of the pandemic, as we looked at, what we needed to do to help with the journey to get to being net zero by 2025, we realised that we had, about, I think it's something like 16% of our business travel trips are based on one-day trips, people travelling there and back in the same day. And Asia Pacific has a relatively large footprint in that. If you look at routes like Sydney, Melbourne, well, given we've gone through a pandemic, realising that we can do without that and not do it, we've actually put that as part of policy to drive that down. So actually, it's achieving a sustainability goal for us in helping us to reduce carbon emissions, but it's also saving on cost. There are going to be some aspects where actually, I think as we get more advanced in this, decisions will need to be made around what we do focus on. And so, we're having a lot more conversations now with airlines around sustainable aviation fuel. And it's just a fact that it costs more to produce SAF than it does to produce standard, aviation fuel. And so as we get into that and it's much more available, we will need to make some decisions around, are we going to prioritise the airlines that have SAF available? And we're looking to even support some of those airlines in the production of that, of how we contribute. Or are we going to go for, the less costly option? And that's something we're still on our journey. We haven't resolved that yet. But I think there's definitely things that you can do in the balancing of it as you look at cost versus carbon. And sometimes I think it comes down to education of your people in the decisions that are made.
Anything more to add, Rachel, on that?
Not really. We're still in the very early stages of our journey. So there has been no real dollar impact at this point. We're at the phase of reviewing the program that we have in place now and identifying areas that are already talking to sustainability. So no real cost impact at this point for us.
Okay. And Michelle, what's your perspective of this cost over carbon?
I have to agree with Nicola there. I do believe there are some cost advantages that you can have. But it is hard to quantify. If you look at staff retention, for instance, being able to put a metric on that, say this amount of staff stayed because we had a sustainability program in place, it's really hard to measure. But I do believe that by investing in sustainability, it will come back to you. But I know it's a hard sell to some finance people to say, look, just trust me, it'll work, because you do need hard and fast numbers to go with it. But ultimately, it will work. And sustainability is generally about only using what you need. So like Nicola said, you could actually reduce your travel program when you actually sit down and look at your travel policy and ask some really good questions as to, do you actually need to travel, or could that be done virtually? You could actually spend less by making your travel program more sustainable.
I think just to add to that, there are some real nuggets within it as well that, to be honest, it puts all of us who are part of, whether it's on the supplier or the buyer side, it puts us all really central in our organisations, because, as we see it, as I said before, we're a client-serving organisation. We might sometimes have 5 or 6 people travelling to see the same client on the same engagement. Well, is that really necessary? And these are the questions that we have to put ourselves on the hook for and develop our programmes around that by understanding what we do. And so we've done a lot of that work to, really identify through the use of technology to say to people, well, you've got 5 going, can you do it with 2? And then 2 join virtually. That was all done through the pandemic. So I think we really have to ride on the back of what happened in the pandemic and keep reminding people of that. It's very easy to forget that we continue to sustain a very profitable business during that period. And, that's something that I think we can all benefit from.
I agree. I think as well, it is very much a hot topic, and the questions, thank you to all of those who are asking questions, very, very much linked into some of these is costs. I think I'm gonna read out one from Gaurav again, because I think it's a good one to maybe summarise and wrap this up. Many Asia Pacific markets focus highly on costs at a ground level. Outside Australia, most SME, mid-market, large market clients, this is more lip service and marketing. Do you agree or disagree? Great question. Who wants to go first? Michelle, let's pick on you first. What do you think?
Well, look, I think historically there has been a lot of what you would call greenwashing. Like, greenwashing is when you use sustainability statements and just for the purposes of marketing or customer retention. You just can't get away with that anymore. I think people are so much more savvy when it comes to sustainability. Any claims that you make that your organisation does, you actually have to have some definitive proof that you are doing this or you're delivering what you promise. So companies are going to be held accountable for any statements they make. So there's just no way of getting away with it anymore. Up until 2020, you could get away with it, but you can't anymore. I don't know if I've answered the question correctly.
Yeah, great answer. Nick? Do you agree?
I'd agree with Michelle. I understand where Gaurav is coming from, in truth, in the fact that, you look at some of the more emerging markets, and for them, they're very focused on bottom line, and actually the sustainability agenda in their own country may not be as prevalent as it is in some of the more developed markets. I think this is where, though, in an organisation, it has to be driven top down. And so therefore, we've gone out very publicly and stated that we are going to be net zero by 2025. If we fail in that, then that's in the eyes of all of our clients as well. And so you have to put your markets on the hook for that. And so that's exactly what we've been able to do through data and using data to make sure that everybody understands what it means to them. And that's down to, you know, the area level for us as a geographic kind of region, down to the service lines we operate in, and also down to the countries. And so I get it. I understand why people would definitely think that, particularly in Asia Pacific, because I think the journey here is lagging behind other parts of the world, but it's ramping up. It really is ramping up. And there's regulatory conditions that are coming in, as per what Michelle just mentioned, that you can't hide from it. So it's something that I don't think it's lip service any longer. Maybe some organisations, but not something that we feel is a worry for us here.
Right. And Rachel, are you gonna agree with Michelle and Nicola? Are you gonna be...
Of course I am.
There you go.
There's certainly more accountability now. I think we've been talking about this for many years, and finally action is being taken. And like I mentioned for the hotel RFP, we're now looking for certification. We're now looking for third-party audits. We just don't accept the tick, yes, we have a program. We want to have proof of that program. So I think as we progress, there's certainly more accountability.
Okay. So thank you. So hopefully, Gaurav, that answers your question. It was a great question to ask. I think as well, Concur released a study results a couple of months ago, which we did earlier this year. And to Nicola's point, over half of the companies that felt they were addressing sustainability felt it came from the top down. So, you know, it really is, I think it's getting that stakeholder buy-in rather than it's purely a cost decision. There's things you can do, as we all know, to minimise cost in a corporate travel programme. But I think you've got to look at it holistically would be sort of my view. So I think as well, legislation, when it comes, will change things. Singapore has a Singapore Green Plan. That's starting to change hearts and minds as well. So that's different probably to Europe, I think, with regards to some of the legislation there. Okay, so we spent quite a bit of time on there. I will continue to go through the other questions. I am looking at them, but there's quite a few which we were actually going to discuss a bit later. So if I haven't got to your question yet, don't you worry at all. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the practicalities of how companies can approach this now. So we've talked about, you know, the importance of sustainability. We've started to talk a little bit about some of the mechanisms to do that and the importance. How do you see companies beginning to really approach this from a practical level? What steps can you do? Nick, I think you touched on a few of these, so I'm going to ask you to talk first. You know, how have you got about the approach of looking at sustainability in your corporate travel program, but then breaking it down into smaller steps? Any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, you know, the original driver of it, as I say, was with the statement that was made by EY around us and our desire to be net zero by 2025. Coming out of that, you know, set a whole machine in place within EY. And so there was a global vice chair of sustainability that was appointed in 2020. And I think the good thing for us, as I think I mentioned it before, is that, you know, we've used data to understand the program. That's a big factor in this, is you've got to have the data. And so, you know, we've looked at that based on what our travel program equates to in the whole total footprint of emissions for EY. And, you know, honestly, for us, 63% of our carbon emissions as a global organisation are made up of air. So that puts a massive spotlight onto the travel meetings and events team. And so as a result of that, though, what it's enabled us to do is really get a seat at the table in many discussions in many parts of our organisation. And in fact, all of the data that is being produced that enables all of our business areas to understand how they're performing against the reduction on business travel emissions is produced out of our team. And so, you know, it's really enabled the changing of the conversations that we would have only being focused around, you know, the cost focus that it was pre-pandemic. And it's really flipped it on its head to the wellness factor, you know, the employee retention and the carbon emissions. That's really become such a big part of it. But data is absolutely driving that. And then it's put us in a spotlight to really be leading and coming up with the drivers of how we can help the business support that. And that's an education journey. So it's on us to educate people through data and dashboards. I mean, we have a traveller dashboard that goes to every traveller now. that they will see what their footprint is as it relates to their spend, their carbon emissions, and whether they were in or out of policy. Equally, every business unit has access to dashboards as well. And so these are just some of the tools that we've been using really to kind of drive the message into the business. But education is absolutely a critical factor, and talking to your people, and particularly those that are your travellers, because they are the ones that are on the road. Because I think Michelle again mentioned earlier, you can do something that's very sustainable and actually very cost focused, but if you do that and it makes your employees completely miserable when they're having to go and serve clients, well, then that's not great for us. And so it's got to be balanced. And so therefore that education and that dialogue really has been critical for us.
Great stuff. Michelle, what do you think?
I think I would reiterate exactly what Nicola said. I think the data is going to tell the story. I don't think you can even start this process without understanding what your travel footprint is. So you really need to get your hands on some nice clean data to then be able to set some goals and targets from there. And obviously EY is very, very mature on their sustainability journey with all of the reporting mechanisms that you do, but you don't even have to be that extensive. Like if you're starting small, really just understanding your carbon and think, okay, well, this is how much of our carbon footprint was in, say, 2019. What could we reduce it? Could we reduce it by 20%? What would that look like? And then start to get some initiatives in place there. But without the data, I think you're a little bit stuck. So that would be my tip, to start with getting your hands on the data.
Brilliant, thank you. And one thing we talked about, Rachel, was the fact that, you know, Brookfield Asset Management is a smaller organisation than EY. So how do you view it, being from a slightly smaller organisation with maybe less resources? Do you think your approach differs?
No, I have to agree that the data is certainly an important part for us right now. So at this point for us, we are utilising our TMC to provide accurate CO2 reporting, which our ESG team then present in our annual report. So the scope 3 of the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the indirect emissions, which include the business air travel, is what we're currently focusing on to get an accurate starting point before we start to look at actually offsetting. We, as a corporation, also, we talked about from the top down. So we align with some sustainability organisations, which then create the discussion and advance awareness across the company of sustainability, which then results in reviewing that ESG report annually. We also do, at this point for us, rely on guidance from our TMC, not just in the reporting, but give us guidance on where we can make greener choices for our business travel.
Brilliant, brilliant. I just want to pick up on that topic of emission tracking and so on. Again, a question from Gaurav. You got the hang of that keyboard today, Gaurav. But your first question was around emission tracking. I'll just put it out to the group. And we've talked about TMCs and their ability there. There's obviously ability through technology tools. What do you perceive as some of the technology tools that are available in APAC, aside from TMCs? Are there any there that come to mind across the group that you guys can address?
I think I think we're all very reliant on the TMC aspect as it stands right now. I think it will evolve, and the supplier element is absolutely critical. We're so linked in with our air suppliers, our hotel suppliers, our TMCs, our online booking tools. For us, we have the privilege at EY in the fact that we're a technology company, as well as the fact that we're, a client-serving an organisation selling services that we do. And so we have a real big pool of resources and are fortunate to be able to build a lot of the solutions ourselves, because actually what we're seeing is that the industry isn't moving necessarily fast enough for us to display things or educate people in the way that we want to. And so I absolutely agree that it's an industry issue. It's an industry problem and it's an industry solution. I think, though, what we've all got to be realistic to is that needs to evolve at pace and at scale. The industry, unfortunately, as we all know, has gone through the worst time in its history through the pandemic. And, airlines, hotels, every part of the industry has been absolutely decimated through the effects of that. But actually, this is something that is enabling us, as I said before, to have a bigger seat at the table in conversation. And so we need to ride on the back of that. And those technologies need to come along on the journey and be agile and evolve. I think in terms of the development of technologies for startup organizations, as an example, that are, working in this space, we see more of that in EY outside of Asia Pacific than we currently do in Asia Pacific. But I think it will change. And I think as we all demand more of it, I think that's what's going to drive the technologies and our suppliers to evolve, along with that as well.
Anybody got anything more to add on that? I'm actually this afternoon. I'm here in the office in Singapore, and I'm meeting up with a startup that tracks carbon. I've never heard of them before. I won't plug them because I genuinely don't even know who they are. But that's an opportunity for, I think those organisations, these startups, we got things like Thrust Carbon, big in the US and Europe, started to come more into Asia Pacific. I think those things are going to come more to the fore, where they become more tailored and allow offsets to occur as well. So I think that's going to start to occur. But it goes back to what the panel has discussed. It all relies on that data element and making sure that the data is correct, because that data needs to flow into a third-party application. It probably can be done manually, but then you're driving cost into your program to get analysts to put the data back into a third-party system. So I think it all combines. It goes back to that foundational element of have a consistent platform, be it a TMC, be it technology, ideally combined, and have that consistent data platform, which we know in Asia Pacific isn't easy because of the nature of the markets around the region. But I think it's so critical that we deal with that. Just adding on to that as well, another question around carbon tax or carbon budgets. Would you incentivize individuals who voluntarily downgrade business to economy? Any thoughts, particular buyers?
I think that's a great idea to encourage behaviour change. Yeah, if there is, because obviously incentives are the best way to encourage any sort of behaviour change. So I think it's a brilliant idea. I don't know of many companies that do this. I'm not sure, Nicola, if you do anything like that at EY.
We haven't done that. We've actually dabbled in that space before, ironically, and it was a tax issue that stopped us from being able to do it, because the minute you're actually incentivizing your employees and giving them a kind of like a benefit in kind as such, there's a tax implication for them. And so, that's not something that we've done. What we are doing is really, through the technologies that we have, we're going to try and, incentivize them in different ways by making it visible. And so, we're in the process and very final stages of launching a new tool internally that will drive our approval process. But within that, so for people that are making the right choices, they're going to see things like kind of like badges telling them, you were a good citizen, you've equated to this amount of trees being planted. So making it kind of real and come alive for them as to what it means by the choices that they've made, what that means. And equally, on the choices that they made, if they're not sustainable, what the impacts are. And so, that's smart stuff that we're doing. And as I said, we're very fortunate to have that sort of technology at our fingertips. And it doesn't have to be as broad as that. I think there are other ways that you can do it just through education, but it is about getting out there and talking to your people as well and understanding what's driving them. And certainly, as we look at our kind of user groups that we work with, so many people are saying that they want to work in an organisation that's focused on sustainability and, social and economic governance. So it's something that is kind of being driven top down, but almost bottom up as well. And we're kind of there in the middle of it, which I think is the best place to be, because we're a driving force within it. But, I think the incentivization piece is definitely worth it, but it's also around the visibility and how you get that messaging across.
I agree. And I would also just jump in there and say, Getting some champions like within the organisation that can champion the message as well. I think that's critical. So if you're not in a position to provide the incentives or the budgets or things like that, just having a group of champions that can help you share the message will be useful.
Anything more to add on that, Rachel? Sorry.
Not really. We're not at that stage yet, but I love these ideas, the incentivizing the badges internally, visually showing what improvements people are making. I love those ideas. So when we get to that, I'll be using some.
I think just to add to it, some of the things that it's not where we're at right now, but the further part of this is actually engaging in conversations with your talent organisation, HR. What does it mean from, a package perspective for people? If you've got people that within their annual review process, they've been a really good citizen, how does that get recognised and how can that be captured in there? And so that is actually why I love this subject and I'm really enthusiastic about it, because it's really reshaping what our role is in a travel programme. And it's enabling different conversations with different parts of the business in so many varying ways. And so, I think it's kind of get stuck in and not be afraid to go in and have a conversation with the talent team and say, well, what does it mean when you're recruiting people? How important is that? And what are the conversations that go on at the interview stage from, a candidate? What are they looking for?
Absolutely. And hopefully, Andy from Hong Kong, that answers your question around business class travel as well and what you can do there. So I hope that helps you, Andy. So a couple of questions coming through, and thank you very much. You guys have been a remarkably engaged audience, so much so that I spent most of my time trying to read in the background, so I hope I'm not being distracted. Some of the comments coming through as well are around the thoughts of around green surcharges. So, is that an opportunity? Could green surcharges be added to business travel flights? What do the group think to that?
I think there's enough surcharges with the fuel surcharges, taxes.
It may happen. It may happen when sustainable aviation fuel becomes more prevalent, when you may have a choice to fly in an aircraft that has 50% sustainable aviation fuel, but it's going to cost you more. So I guess it is like a surcharge. That may be an option down the track. But yeah, I agree with Rachel. There's so many surcharges already. The thought of another one, I don't think people would appreciate at the moment.
Fully agree. I think exactly as you've just articulated. I think that would be good. There's been several questions which I will address at the end, just to end on, because there's been some good questions around this and the impact on our recovery. Let me ask this one though. We've been approached by more corporate clients recently. This is from Kate Quee, I presume from a hotel chain. More corporate clients recently for the carbon footprint report based on room night utilisation. Are the travel managers interested in hotels' full sustainability report besides the carbon footprint report? We actually had a bit of a briefing, the committee, last week from a hotel chain, so which was really interesting. So I'll put this question to the group from Kate. Do you think that buyers would be interested in a hotel's full sustainability report as well as a carbon footprint?
Personally, I think so. I think where we're at in our journey is that, we're looking at many sources of data. As we see it as it relates to air, that's actually much more easy to measure in the metrics of that because of the way that air is captured at the booking point. The hotel piece of it right now is a bit of a quandary, if I'm honest, but it's actually starting to change. And so I would say to any, hotel supplier out there, don't worry about whether you're kind of like over providing data and information. Send it anyway. If your organisation or your client can do something with it, great. If they can't, because they're not at that stage, it doesn't matter. But actually, it's again about that engagement. From our perspective as a buyer, we know that our suppliers are taking it seriously. We are tasked, as many organisations are, as part of our, carbon ambition to be net zero by 2025. By that period, we have to be working with 75% of our suppliers that have science-based targets. And so, that's a journey, and a lot of organisations on the supply side are not there with that yet. But equally, if there's information that you have that you think is potentially useful, you might think it's the information overload, I would say send it in anyway. Let the client decide whether it's something they can use.
I completely agree with Nicola there. From a hotel perspective, some hotels might do amazing things with their carbon reduction, but they may not treat their staff as well as they should. And I think sustainability is very holistic, and I think all the information that can be provided, because there will be also some organisations that place greater value on the social sustainability over the environmental sustainability as well. So I think the more information, the better.
I have to agree, especially when legislation comes into play. We're going to need all the data that we can get.
I think it's almost a problem in the fact that, figuring out how all the data then ends up being bolted in together. That's a challenge that's going to come for all of us, because there's going to be so many different sources of data. Figuring out how that all gets collated so that it can be effectively measured is something that, a lot of organisations are trying to get their arms around right now.
Great. Just time for one quick question, which is probably a really interesting one to end on as we talk about, as we've begun this journey talking about sustainability in corporate travel. And it's actually come from 2 or 3 people. I'll just call out a couple of names. RJ, thank you very much. Ika, I know you asked it twice. If you thought I'd missed it, I hadn't. But I was wanting to end on this one, which is, okay, so we've talked about sustainability. And the reality is that's likely to remove business travel or travel in general, right? Because there'll be alternatives such as Teams. Well, how does that balance off with the recovery that we need in the travel industry and that we all want to see? How do you feel that sustainability and a business travel recovery in this region can coexist? Nice, easy one to end on.
For me personally, I think it's absolutely easy for it to coexist. I think the one thing the pandemic taught all of us is that nothing replaces the need for human interaction. That's as part of, kind of a sustainability journey as anything else, in the fact that you've got social interactions. And so we've definitely seen that. We want our people to be engaging, and we don't want to change the culture that's at the heart of the organisation that we are, which is being out with our clients and interacting as a team. But that's why I think for us, there is this opportunity for us really to put some capabilities around that, using the data to say, look, carry on doing all this, but do it this way. And understanding what the reduction means for you to get to your goal by, for example, we want to reduce our carbon footprint and we know what that metric is within EY. Well, how are we going to help the business do that and make it visible to them? And it doesn't need to necessarily be a huge amount, actually. I think as you do it sensibly, it absolutely supports the industry, because all suppliers within the industry have got this pressure on them as well. And so it coexists. It absolutely coexists. And people may feel that it doesn't, but I think the pandemic really did teach us that business doesn't actually evolve and grow without interaction. So that's not something that I think we need to be afraid of personally.
I have to agree. I have to agree with you, Nicola, on that. And I think my leader has been quoted as saying that business is a team sport, and you really need to have that personal interaction to do good business. So I don't think travel is going anywhere. I think what we just need to be cognizant of is traveling responsibly and making good when you are going to travel, make really good decisions when you do travel. Try and get as many meetings as you can in on one trip or whatever it might be. But I'm confident travel's not going away.
Fantastic. Right, we are on the hour, so I'm going to call it there. Thank you very much to the panelists today. Thank you, Michelle, for your presentation and your time in the panel. Nicola and Rachel, I really, really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed it out there listening to us. You've certainly given us lots of questions, which is great. One thing I will say, Ali, you just came in on some great questions at the end around some of the best ways to measure and track. How do you reduce your footprint when traveling? Another question was how offsetting can take place. We intend to cover these at later webinars for you, so keep an eye out for when we send out invitations. And Delphine mentioned it in her initial presentation. We will be at the Bangkok GBTA PATA Summit, which is on the 8th and 9th of December. There'll be an education forum there. So you'll get another chance if you are attending to ask us questions there. If not, look forward to the new year and a webinar to address these questions there. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.